So let's meet Bob. So one of the things we will often do when it comes to marketing is create a buyer persona. Now this seems a little bit silly, but it's really going to help you when it comes to marketing. And what we might do with a buyer persona is we draw a picture of Bob on a piece of A4 paper, put it in landscape mode, and draw a picture of Bob. Write down Bob's age, Bob's relationship, his marital status. Does Bob have children? What type of lifestyle does Bob have? What type of needs and problems does he have? Think about all the different things you can think about Bob in terms of what we call a buyer demographic. Where does he live? Income levels. What does he like to do in his spare time? What are his hobbies? And then we want to write down that buyer persona. We want to create that map of our perfect ideal customer. Now, oftentimes we can assume the buyer persona at the beginning, but as time goes on and we become more familiar with our customer base, we'll start to see different things coming forward and different things in common that our buyers have. And then we can modify the buyer persona. But it's very important to have a clear idea of who Bob is, what his lifestyle is, what his aspirations are, what his problems are, what his income levels are, all of these different things. Because when we start marketing to Bob, we need to be clear and specific. And this is one of the biggest mistakes people make with marketing, is they go too broad. They try and sell everything to the whole world. If you ask somebody who's very enthusiastic about their business and the potential of their business, who would buy your product? And you'd be amazed how many people will say, oh, everybody, this is for everybody. And that's a classic marketing mistake. You need to figure out who your buyer persona is. You can modify it, broaden it, narrow it over time, but you have to start somewhere, and then Bob will start responding to you because you're speaking to him. And what is Bob buying? So when it comes to Bob, once we've set up his persona, what is he trying to buy? Because often, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to starting to sell their product is they're talking about what they perceive Bob needs, rather than asking, what is Bob actually trying to buy? As an example, we had someone come to us and they were making queries about how we might market their business. And we said to them, what is it you're selling? And they said, we sell artificial grass. Okay. Now, immediately I stepped back a bit and I was looking at this and I was thinking, Bob isn't trying to buy artificial grass. So we carried on talking to this client, just like getting him to open up a little bit more. So who are you actually currently serving to? And what is it they have in common? And he soon started to say, well, it's people that don't have time to do gardening. So when I first heard artificial grass, I'm thinking, oh, football pitches. They're selling to football pitches. That's what they're doing. But what he's actually saying was a lot of people are buying. And I said, so who's buying it? And he was saying middle class people. They don't want to do the gardening at the weekend. Elderly people that can no longer mow the lawn, but they still want to look out onto a nice garden. People that have got kids and they're playing football on the grass constantly. So immediately we've got 3 types of buyer persona, but what do they all have in common? They all had a lack of time to do the gardening. So what they were really trying to buy was low maintenance gardening. That was what they were trying to achieve. That was the problem they had. High maintenance gardening they didn't have time for, and they wanted a low maintenance garden, but they still wanted the look of grass. They didn't just want to put some stones and some concrete down. So Bob, in this case, is actually trying to buy low maintenance gardening. So now when it comes to marketing that product, we could market it as the company could make the marketing mission statement of, we provide low maintenance gardens. And then once he realized that, and he was like, oh, and we can start selling these high bed plant pots, which bring the planting up here, because elderly people can't bend down, but they still want to be able to do their flowers. And then he really started to realize what Bob was trying to buy. And he actually then started opening up the ideas of the services they could actually offer as additional value. So he went from selling artificial grass to providing low maintenance gardening solutions. And his website and his marketing could now reflect that and be much more specific. And then what was interesting is we then did a search on Google and we tested this. We looked at the Google Analytics and we looked at artificial grass, number of searches in the local area, it was a local business, and then low maintenance gardening. And I can't remember, but I think it's 3 to 4 to 5 to 1 difference in favor of low maintenance gardening. So it's really important to understand it's not about what you're selling, which might be artificial grass. It's about what Bob is actually trying to buy. What problem is he trying to solve? And then you sell to the solution of that problem. So let's think about this. Let's think about Bob's kettle. What type of kettle is Bob trying to buy? You might think, we sell kettles. Bob is buying a kettle. Well, he might want a budget kettle. He might want a status kettle for his kitchen. He might want a really, really nice looking branded kettle just to boil his water. He might want a kettle that is really safe because he's got a young family. It might be important to him to reduce the environmental impact. So once we start looking at that, Bob's kettle becomes quite complex, because if we're trying to sell a status kettle to Bob who's trying to buy a budget kettle, then we're not going to get the sale. So this helps us to deepen and understand the buyer persona. What is Bob buying? What is Bob's kettle? What is the product he's looking for? Because you might sell a kettle, but you might realize actually what you need to start doing is selling different kettles to different Bobs. So meeting Bob, understanding the buyer persona, what Bob is buying, is going to lead us to which kettle Bob is actually looking for. And once we understand that, we can address our marketing to those needs accordingly. Now, one of the biggest problems that Bob's going to have sometimes with buying from a business is he can't understand you. Now, there's this principle of communication where someone has specialist knowledge in an area, they start communicating in that language, expecting the layman to understand. And to Bob, it's like you're speaking Chinese. So when you want to communicate effectively with a potential buyer, you have to translate your industry speak into something that Bob can understand. You see, each area of expertise has its own language. The English language is very interesting like that, in the sense of you can learn English, but you can still be speaking to someone in English and they're speaking an alien language. Because you could be speaking to a web developer and he starts talking to you about HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and all you want to know is, will my page look pretty on the internet? So the question you have to ask is, when you're communicating to Bob with your marketing, is, can Bob understand you? So one of the greatest skills a marketer can have is the ability to translate Chinese into English, to translate an area of expertise into something the layman can understand. Now, there are exceptions where people are very technically astute and they're trying to buy stuff that they are familiar with that isn't Chinese to them. But a lot of the time, typically, Bob can't understand. Let's just look at an example. I was talking to this company and I said, what do you do? Explain to me what you do. And it's usually where I start when I'm consulting with a company is, what exactly are you selling? And this guy said, well, we sell Cat5, Cat6 data cabling. And then he just rambled on about all these technical specifications of the cables he sold. And I just sort of stood there and I thought, okay, stop. What is your client trying to buy? He was like, oh, Cat5, Cat6 data cable. And I said, no, it's not what he's trying to buy. What is he trying to solve? And he said, well, usually they've got a really slow intranet in their office and they'll have staff working on these computers and they're slow. And what we do is we go in and we speed up all the data connections and we change their computers and we make it all faster. I said, so what they really are trying to buy is a more efficient computer system which reduces staff downtime. He was like, yeah, that's typically what they're trying to buy. So I said, that's what you've got to sell. But his clients wouldn't understand that he was solving their problems because they couldn't understand him because he was speaking in Chinese. So when we start marketing to Bob, our buyer persona, the question we have to ask is, can Bob understand what we're saying? So you have to translate your product, service, or offering into language that he can understand. You can say, this is like this, or this does this. This is going to do this for you. And you have to be really clear about the need to help Bob understand the problems you're going to solve for him. And we have to understand what Bob's favorite subject is. Bob's favorite subject is him. So another typical mistake we're going to see in marketing is a company that talks about itself all the time. It's like going to a party and meeting someone for the first time, and all they want to talk about is them. So you stand there saying, hi, what's your name? And, oh yeah, my name's so-so, and I work at this, and I drive this car, and I went on holiday this year, and I did this, and I did that, and I think this, and I think that. If you've ever got caught in that type of conversation, you're probably after a little while starting to think, how am I going to escape? How am I going to get out of this? This is really boring. I'm not really interested. You see, Bob's favorite subject is himself. Remember, marketing is communication. And one of the arts of communicating effectively with people is talking about them, not talking about you. So Bob's favorite subject is how he can solve his garden maintenance problems. His favorite subject is the problems he has, not artificial grass, not Cat5 cabling. So whenever you talk to Bob, you must always talk to Bob's needs and Bob's ego. So if you're talking about yourself all the time in your marketing and your business, saying, we're wonderful, aren't we great, look what we did, Bob's going to lose interest. But if you're talking to Bob, saying, this is going to help you, Bob, this is going to give you this is going to solve this, Bob's going to like that.